Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and on this episode of Action Awareness, I want to talk about Bulking Stew of the Sumo Wrestlers. This action lets you discard any number of cards to turn them into power counters. This card isn't go big or go home, it's go big, then go home, because it's very powerful. And yet, it isn't really anything new, with the few differences that exist being subtle. And that summarizes the Sumo Wrestlers for me. Their actions don't really do anything different from before, they just do it well. We've seen other card to counter actions before, which are typically used at the end of the game where you no longer need the cards. I'm not counting the Dead Rise because 1, you aren't getting power, and 2, you may intentionally over-discard for what you can actually play. But the cards that come to mind are Angry Mob, which places instead of discards, and its inferior cousin, Cull the Weak. To a lesser extent, Embiggen fits the same criteria, even though you are only getting temporary power. There are other cards that let you discard a lot of cards, but they are rarely whole hand dumps. But while Bulking Stew has only one mechanical difference, there are two other situational differences that make this card stand out when it is otherwise a repeat card. First, the mechanical difference. You have to read the card carefully. Discard any number of cards. For each card discarded, place a +1 counter on one of your minions. It's easy to think that all the counters have to go to the same minion, but they don't. Because of the way the card is written, one of your minions is applied to each iteration of for each card discarded. Note that comparable cards start with the choice of minion and later reference that minion. Bulking Stew does not. This means that you can distribute the power counters as you see fit. Sometimes that will mean a ton of counters all on one minion, but other times it won't. And this is important because it allows you to affect multiple bases at once and allows the action to stretch across a single base. This matters greatly to disco dancers because their divas and other copying mechanics can only copy actions when minions are on the same base. Let's say you discard 8 cards and have 2 bases, each with a diva and another minion. The first non-diva can get 5 power, and the second non-diva can get 3. The divas can copy their respective shares for another 5 and 3 power on the same base. You still get the same 16 power as if you did all 8 power on the single base, but you get to distribute it exactly as you need. There's a temptation to make Bulking Stew be a big play on a single base at the end, but it doesn't have to be. Even without the disco dancers, any time an action gives you this level of granularity, it is a boon. You can place the right power on the right bases, hopefully grabbing more than one on the same turn. The Sumos don't have any extra action or minion plays, so you have to rely on your partner faction or sheer minion power to execute this. Because of their lack of extra plays, actions cannot be wasted, so even if you are setting up a future base to score later, it's worth it. Flexibility is important, even when you choose not to utilize it. For the remaining differences, I think it's critical that the Sumo Wrestlers have this card, as opposed to other factions. First, it triggers additional power from the top tier. Each top tier can get an additional power counter from the action. Note that this is not one extra counter per card, but a single counter that is received completely after the action is resolved. This amounts to having an extra virtual card or two, either allowing for more total power or allowing you to hold on to one more card, which is significant for the second reason, the reason why this might not just be an endgame card. Unlike other factions, the Sumos have the means to crawl back from a hand dump, and do so quickly. There are some standout cards that let you draw a number of cards, such as Seance, Recover Arcane Wisdom, and especially Square Deal. But when you rely on a singular card to recover, if you don't see that card, you're probably in trouble. However, when you consider the other Sumo cards, their card draw is pretty insane. It's not uncommon to have more than 10 cards when you play Bulking Stew. They can draw up to 3 cards from their third tiers. They have a Tribute card in Performance Prize and a much better Mystic Studies in Fighting Spirit Prize. Unfortunately, they only have 1 copy of each of these cards, otherwise the recovery would be even stronger. And as you'll see on Monday, Yokozuna has a talent to let you draw a card every turn, no strings attached. So it's extremely possible that you can not only draw enough cards to cycle your deck and draw Bulking Stew again, but you also have enough cards to merit using it again. Obviously, the potency of Bulking Stew, like comparable cards, is tied directly to the number of cards in your hand, which is typically capped at 10. One of those cards should be a minion that generates more power playing itself than being discarded. Even if the minion is a rookie sumo, discarding a card that Bulking Stew would otherwise discard still generates a power counter, but allows top tiers to trigger again. So Rookie Sumo can generate a total of 5 power with 2 cards from hand, and with Bulking Stew, that leaves 7 cards to discard for a total of 9 power, including your 2 top tiers triggering again. That's 14 power from a whole hand dump, and while there are bigger combos, this is pretty hard to counter. You also have to consider the 2 top tiers printed power, as well as any previous growth, to see just how quickly the sumos can break bases. Add in any talents that let you draw extra cards, and you could have even more power to work with. Unless you are desperate, Bulking Stew is really meant to be a sizable hand dump. The sumos have 2 copies of Chikara Mizu that can handle the more moderate gaps. Bulking Stew does give power counters, so it could be played on a turn where you don't want to break a base, but with few exceptions, this is a terrible play. The next player will surely latch on for easy points, and I've seen it happen, and it's incredibly frustrating as a third player. With the sumos, and with any discard-based faction, cards cannot be wasted because they are both your currency and your catalyst. By the time you are ready to play Bulking Stew, you should have at least one of your top tiers, because without it, Bulking Stew becomes just a slightly better form of its predecessors. I really like this card with the Astro Knights, particularly Walking Carpet. Because of the flexibility to distribute counters, you can both win Walking Carpet's base and set up a base to score on your next turn. Assuming you hold on to at least a few cards, you can score a base by yourself on your next turn. The sumos have a great deal of pairings, but Bulking Stew particularly loves card regeneration, so cards like Square Deal are fantastic targets. Card draw is always great, but with Bulking Stew, it can send the sumos into overdrive. The final note about Bulking Stew is that it obviously needs time to facilitate. When a faction needs time, stall tactics are welcome, and the sumos have quite a few. They can move other players' minions, and also in high quantities. This could allow you to score points on bases that players would normally avoid because the VP distribution is unfavorable for the winner. By using less cards on the bases where you aren't competing, you have more cards to ensure that Bulking Stew wins you the bases where you are. Bulking Stew isn't new mechanically, but it is certainly fresh contextually. What do you think of this card? Let me know in the comments. That's it for this week. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.